Cool. I'll just post a recording on LinkedIn and we'll do that instead. But we are live to talk about the changes that the SBA has made. And let's start by putting up this tweet on the screen here because this is fun, right? They are worked up. I don't know how do you share
Work,
this? Oh, here we go.
worked up is a way to put it for sure.
Yeah, well, people were worked up today about this, and I think we should talk through it and just make sure that everybody kind of understands the implications, particularly for our clients. So, for everybody who's watching, thank you for joining us. We are here to talk about the SBA limits disastrous Biden era underwriting standards. Can you see this on the screen here? Oh no, I didn't put it up. Here we go.
No, I
Share. Okay,
cannot.
there we go. That kind of killed my. All right, SBA limits disastrous Biden era underwriting standards, Kevin. So big changes today in SBA, ETA, M&A land, which you and I live in and breathe every single day. People buying American small businesses utilizing SBA 7A debt and the various SBA M&A or SBA loan programs that are available to folks for the acquisition of really sub 10, sub $8 million businesses. The SBA has announced some sweeping changes to those, and we thought it would be wise to go on and talk through them. I saw a lot of hyperbole. Um,
Yeah.
I'll start by saying, and this is my disclaimer up front because we are lawyers, um, that number one, these do take effect on June 1st. So anybody who's in process right now, this is important. Okay. If your lender has not pulled your loan application yet with your SBA lender, then you will be subject to whatever SOP, standard operating procedure, we'll talk about what that means in just a second, is in place when they do that. So if your loan is not approved or pulled by June 1st, you're going to want to talk to your lender and make sure that this happens. Then you will be subject to these new rules. And we'll talk about what the new rules are. But it is a pretty significant change back to, and Kevin, I was with Bruce Marks at SM Bash a few weeks ago, and he called this. He predicted, he said, Eric, we're going back to 2021 um, for the SOPs, and it looks like he was right. So effectively, we're going back a couple years in time. It signals that the SBA, led by the Trump administration and the folks at Doge, are not interested necessarily in expanding SBA lending. I think that they're moving towards tightening.
Yep.
So if you are somebody that's in the SBA, ETA world, this is something that you should be aware of. If you're planning to buy an American small business, I don't think you need to rush out and do it. You certainly shouldn't rush out and do it. But
Drop
um,
everything.
yeah, because Kevin, I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see more ratcheting towards tightening of rules. Um,
Agreed.
and the upshot is, I think it's fine, right? And we'll talk about why that is. I mean, we're basically going back to where we were a couple years ago, and deals were getting done a couple years ago, and it wasn't. So this isn't the Armageddon that I think a few people thought it was today. But I just tweeted out a thread that breaks down the implications that we're going to walk through on this. Um, so that's available. I'll drop it in the notes there as well. But let's cut through it, Kevin, talk about what's actually changed, and then we could talk about them one at a time. So number one, if you're using SBA 7A debt to buy a business, the SOP is your Bible. Okay. The SOP 5010-8. Now you're never going to want to read this, right? This is a very, very long document. Even us as lawyers, it's a little bit of a tedious document. A lot of it does not pertain to acquisition financing either. So you certainly can look at it if you're curious, but it's not something that you're probably ever going to sit down with a cup of coffee and read.
Side
But
note, I will point out that perhaps unironically, SOP 5010-8 is exactly 420 pages.
okay, wow,
But
is
anyway,
that right? Are you serious? You making
no,
that
it's
up?
just it's I'm kidding, but it's close.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just, it's over 400. I'm actually still indexing. It's so big, it's taking a minute to load, but it's pushing 500 pages. It's
I could
massive.
have
No
seen
one's
that as
actually
being
reading this.
I could see that being a possibility. So that's funny. You actually had me. I'm like, wow. Um, but so the SOP lays out the rules, right? And
Yeah.
what happens in any deal, you're buying a business using SBA debt. You're going to go obviously source a business, find a high quality business that you want to buy, put that business under LOI, and then you go talk to an SBA lender. You show them the business. The SBA lender is going to vet it themselves. They've got a credit committee that's going to look closely at it. The BDO, the business development officer up front, who you'll be interfacing with, they know the underwriting requirements well, but they're more of the sales arm of the SBA lender. So they're going to look at the business alongside you, run some models, make
Yep.
sure it fits the bank's credit box, and if it does, then they take it and they give it to the credit committee. The credit committee is a bunch of detached underwriters who are going to protect the bank's interest to make sure that the loan is properly underwritten. They're going to look at these SOPs. They're going to look at their understanding of the SBA rules. They're going to think about the deal, make sure it's a business that would be prudent to lend on, because in addition to just the hard and fast rules, they have to conform with prudent lending standards, meaning they don't do anything stupid in the process. But from there, it even goes a step further, right? We get
Yeah.
deep in the deal process. And this is why I always harp, whether it's us or anybody else, hire a good lawyer who knows SBA. They could be the best mid-market lawyer in the world, Kirkland and Ellis, Cravath. But if they don't know SBA, what's going to happen is your deal will be structured wrong. You're not going to know that in some instances until 90 to 100 days into the process, when that bank brings in their lawyer at the 3 yard line, once your documents are fully baked, and goes, hey, this note that you have isn't eligible. This
Yeah.
earnout structure doesn't qualify. This working capital adjustment doesn't qualify, or a whole host of different potential issues. And then you got to go back at the 100-day mark to a seller who's very burned out, to a broker who's very ready to close, and tell them we got to change a material part of the deal, and you got a big problem. So that's really how it happens kind of in practice, and where this SOP comes in. It's hidden behind the scenes in the process. Is that a fair way to characterize it, Kevin? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you nailed it. I think that's a very fair way to characterize it. Spot on.
Okay, so they have now tightened these SOPs,
Yep.
and let's walk through rule by rule and talk about each one. So number one, the partial buyout is effectively dead.
Yes.
Okay. If you're buying a business right now and you're thinking that the seller is going to roll over equity into the new deal, that there's going to be some sort of rollover like you see in mid-market M&A, forget about it. Okay. It's still technically possible, but what they did to the rule completely gutted it.
That's
Number
right.
one, and by the way, guys, this is not doomsday. Okay. We didn't get partial rollovers until when, Kevin?
We got partial change of ownership. What I guess it's coming up on 2 years ago in 2023. And then they clarified to allow more of a traditional rollover structure in just in December. So very recently.
December. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was Biden era stuff. So it's not that surprising that they're targeting stuff that happened during the Biden administration. But you now have to go back to a stock deal. So if you want seller to roll over equity, you have to do a stock deal, which means a riskier transaction because of historical liability and structuring reasons, which we won't talk about today, but is important. Um, but most importantly, if you're going to roll over equity, the prior rule said that if the seller keeps more than 20%, then they personally guarantee it. Less
Yeah.
than 20%, they do not personally guarantee it. Now they're saying it does not matter how much equity the seller rolls over, they are personally guaranteeing it for two full years.
Yeah.
Which, if you're a seller of a business, Kevin,
Zero
and
chance.
some Yahoo from Wharton is buying your tree trimming business and says, "Hey, Kev, I know you've run this business for 30 years, but I'm going to do it. I'm taking multi-million dollar personally guaranteed debt. I'm going to take it from here, but also for 2 years, you're on the hook if I screw it up." What's your response to that?
The response is not only is the personal guarantee absent my sales proceeds a hell no, it's especially a hell no, given that I'm the seller because I'm the deepest pocket. If something goes wrong, they are 100% coming after me as the seller to collect everything. Um, so unless the buyer is sitting on piles of millions of dollars of cash, there's not a snowball's chance in hell I'm ever agreeing to that.
Yeah, they're coming after the purchase price.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, your purchase price is hanging out there. And now I'm already thinking about workarounds, right? And so we're going to run into situations where seller rollover is necessary, right? Like in licensure situations and
Yep.
things like that. So 2 years, right? So if you are a buyer and you have to have them stay on to retain a license or something like that, you've got to sell them on the idea that for 2 years. Now, their pushback is almost certainly going to be, well, what if you screw up the business, Kevin? Like, what if, and your response to that is going to be, well, you're going to be here for those 2 years to make sure I don't screw up the business. So your risk is mitigated. This is really only going to be successful, I think, and we'll continue to think about other workarounds and how you would sell it, but really only going to be viable in situations where the seller has no leverage. It's a
That's right.
business that's not saleable. Nobody wants it. They've been on the market for a long, long time. You come along and you say, here's, I'll buy the business, but we're going to structure it very conservatively. Here's how we're going to do it. And for 2 more years, you're with me and you're personally guaranteed on the debt.
Yeah.
If I'm out there bidding on businesses today, though, I'm not screwing around with this anymore
No way.
because I'm not wasting time bidding on anything that has asking the seller to personally guarantee debt. I can hear Clint Fiore rolling his eyes right now. Um,
Clint's gonna love this.
yeah, so that's dead. Partial rollovers effectively dead, not completely, but effectively. Number two, standby notes. What's a standby note, Kevin?
Yeah, standby note is effectively a promissory note, basically a debt instrument and promissory note that the seller is going to hold and be paid over time. That is not serviceable during a extended period of time. So it's a promissory note, save 10% of the purchase price, but no interest and principal will be payable for some term. Under the SBA regs, it's usually 2 or more years, where a standby note is going to be used for specific reasons that we'll go into. But suffice it to say, it's a note where for some period of time, no actual debt service is going to be permitted. So it's just going to sit out there and accrue interest.
Okay. And Kevin, we're now live across LinkedIn, X,
Sweet.
and YouTube just for purposes. Okay, so it's a standby note. It is effectively a note that is put in place. You're not going to make payments on it for a period of time. A few years ago, those standby notes had to be in existence for 10 years or have a
That's right.
10-year term before they could be repaid, which is a really tough sell. You got to go to a seller and go, hey, a portion of this purchase price is going to be in the form of this standby note. I'm not going to make payments on it for 10 years. And I believe that the new SOP says no interest either. I got to double check that. But the note's going to be in existence for 10 years. I'm not going to make any payments on it. Do you agree? And obviously, most sellers, particularly those that are
No.
old, are going to say, absolutely not. I'm not
Right.
agreeing to set aside purchase price for 10 years. Now, we did see those get through, right? And what it does is it reduces your down payment with an SBA loan. And you may have just said this a second ago. I was logging this into LinkedIn, but 10% equity injection. The SBA requirement is a 10% equity injection. You've got to put down a down payment of 10%. Up to 5% of that can be in the form of this standby note.
Yep.
And so now, if you can get them agreed to hold the note for 10 years, then you can reduce your down payment from 10% to 5%. A couple years ago, they gave us an interim rule that's now gone, and that's the change, which was the 2-year standby, which is a
That's
lot
right.
more palatable to the seller. Hey, will you hold this for 2 years? That was very easy to get through. Now, don't fret. Again, thinking about implications and workarounds. If you're somebody who's going, well, shit, I was sorry to cuss on our live stream, Kevin. Screwed up there.
My ears are burning.
If you were somebody who said was out there vetting deals and saying, well, I was really hoping banking on only putting in 5% to to buy a business and therefore I could look at larger businesses. Now I've got to look at smaller businesses, investors. Okay.
That's
There are
right.
still a lot of people in the marketplace that want to invest in transactions that are willing to foot that gap. Most banks, and it's bank by bank and it's subject to prudent lending standards. And in some instances, believe it or not, the content charlatans out there actually are in some cases right. And I think I've tweeted this before, so I shot at myself. But 0% financing is theoretically possible, where you as the buyer put up 0%, the investors bring the other 10%. Most banks are going to ask you to bring 1 to 3%. So now, if you're doing a fundraise, you just have to throw that standby note out, probably,
Yep.
and bank on the fact that you're just going to have to fundraise a little bit more funds. So again, a change back to the prior rule, not the end of the world. What else, Kev, on that?
Yeah, on the I mean, I I think that's it. I think you hit the nail on the head. And there's probably some schools of thought that are, even in the community that are celebrating a change like this anyway. Because in addition to, there may being avenues for investors if you don't have the appetite for investor capital or things like that, this will have a chilling effect on certainly some subset of buyers and their ability to get larger deals done, which, again, I'm just kind of hat tipping to different sectors of the community. I think there is a pretty large school of thought that maybe that's a good thing, right? That maybe if you're trying to close a deal with the absolute minimum amount of capital out of pocket, should you be closing that deal anyway? So I think we'll also see at least some subset, maybe kind of rethinking the model of their search. But otherwise, I think you hit the nail on the head. If it was raising some equity and keeping 85% of the common, now you've got to raise a little more equity and keep 77% of the common. 70%, 77% of a large pie is still really great for a searcher putting a deal together and operating a business. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's the only other color I would add, is, especially for those of you out there searching, just to keep in mind with the tightened credit standards. There is investor money on the table, and there is also, the very valid and rational approach of maybe just kind of revisiting the economics and model of what you're looking for, reducing target purchase price, et cetera. I mean, there's levers to pull still, but just food for thought.
Yeah, and if you're keeping track at home of winners and losers here in this situation, one of the winners I think is actually investors, right?
Yeah,
Because all of a sudden that partial standby that represented 5% of the equity injection is out, and investor dollars just became that much more valuable.
that's right.
So, winner number one. Winner number two, let's turn to it, is high net worth individuals. So, the SBA has now removed the personal resource test. Personal liquidity and high net worth will no longer disqualify a borrower. Lenders may now evaluate global cash flow, including spousal income and income from affiliates. Access to SBA finance just got easier for buyers with healthy balance sheets. Previously we saw some odd scenarios where you had people who had spouses that had an income that couldn't be calculated into the debt service coverage ratio. And by the way, when you take SBA debt, um, it has to meet a debt service covered ratio, which means monthly payment against how much we can anticipate the business is going to cash flow based on the historical financials of the business.
Yep.
The SBA minimum is 1.15. So you have to cash flow 1.15 of every debt payment. No lender is going to lend on 1.15 because it's very, very skinny, very thin. Most lenders are going to require a higher margin of at least 1.25, 1.5. Many buyers are looking for businesses north of 2, though. So
Yep.
DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, is something pretty important in SBA land. This rule change regarding high net worth impacts that directly. Now, as you're thinking through, the lender and their credit team that we talked about a few minutes ago is thinking through the viability of the loan. Previously, you couldn't think about a spouse that had a high income. You couldn't think about a healthy balance sheet. All you were looking at is, does this business cash flow sufficiently to
Yeah.
check our box and the SBA's box for DSCR? That's now been pulled back. So one of the winners of the under the Trump administration is rich people. Imagine that, Kevin.
I'm shocked. Absolutely floored.
Disgusted. All right, so loser, part and parcel. Citizenship rules have now been dramatically tightened. I think we talked about this a few months ago. It's been codified now into the rules. U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents, green card holders are eligible. U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents with green cards, visa holders, and foreign nationals no longer eligible. You cannot buy a business. You cannot own even 1% of the business if you are not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that because this isn't targeted kind of borrowers and guarantors. This is anywhere in the cap table, like a fraction of 1%, that this would apply to as long as there is an SBA loan on that business. So it's really important part not just for searchers who may be in that situation, but also as you round out your capitalization table to make sure that you're being smart as you're putting together your investors. If you have investors on your cap table, to make sure that they meet the ownership requirements as well.
Yeah, and get out ahead of that. Again, investors big winner here, foreign investors loser, any foreign nationals loser. But get out ahead of that. Make sure that those people are. And there's been lots of international interest in M&A.
Tons.
I had a deal closed a couple years ago. I needed a 600K capital raise. Somebody from New Zealand came in and put in 460K. Great guy, great partner in the business. And he's out. He can no longer invest in these transactions. And don't think you're going to be cute too with workarounds. Well, SBA debt exists in that business. Transferring equity while an SBA debt is in place is not feasible under the rules without in the first year you need SBA and lender approval, and then years 1 through 10, or well 2 through
Two
10 or
through 10.
whatever it
Yep.
is, you need lender approval for it. And if they catch you doing that stuff on the back end, you're in technical default. Now, um, one of the things I always clarify for folks is it's just while the SBA debt exists and
Right.
is applicable in the business. So once you buy that business, and of course we're talking, potentially 5 to 10 years later, but you can then bring in whomever you want at that point in time, assuming that you still want to. But that does hurt. I think that makes buyers to some extent a loser here because the liquidity hit U.S. investors again, big winner.
Yes, for sure.
Jumping back, financial statements. Banks utilize tax returns to underwrite these loans. They are going to they're even going to pull a tax transcript at closing to make sure that the tax returns that you've been provided match the tax returns that the IRS has on file.
Yep.
Up until now, that was the only thing that they could look at. They could look at a tax return only, which in some instances made um, underwriting transactions very difficult if tax returns were unavailable, incomplete if they hadn't been filed for a new uh, fiscal year closing. Now, if the tax returns are unavailable, if they're incomplete, if they don't reflect the actual operations, like in a carve out scenario, then you can utilize CPA prepared or reviewed financial statements. Now, how that's going to be interpreted, we'll see.
Right.
But suffice to say, there's now more flexibility in the underwriting process to have alternative means of getting your business approved. Any fun
Yeah, I think
stories there,
that's
Kev?
no, I think I don't know that we need to belabor that one, but I mean that is a pretty significant shift. I think of deals I've worked on in the past where maybe it's a pretty quick turnaround, and the seller had bought the company less than 3 years prior and doesn't have copies of older documents and things like that. To have other alternative ways to get at it, I think is going to be a big shift. I think this is definitely in the win column for searchers and buyers here.
I always think back to this deal I had a couple years ago. This fun, fast story. This was 2022. They hadn't filed personal or business returns, Kevin, since 2010. Nothing. And they gave us the forms, right? They filled them in. They had their CPA filled them in. They intended to file them. And then we go to close. We pull tax transcripts and nothing, nothing. Then we go, what's going on? Well, they're like, no, no, we're going. This is in Colorado. They're like, we're going down to Denver to file to file the returns.
That's
And it was
a few
like
other red flags there.
a few other, obviously the deal died, but it was one of those things that you learn about our tax system in the process,
For sure.
of how much you can just kind of get by for a long time if you try. But anyways, not recommending that home.
Insert obligatory disclaimer that is not tax advice, nor are you encouraged or recommended to do such.
Yes, yes. One other important change regarding kind of underwriting franchise review. We get the question all the time, do you do franchise M&A? Yes,
Yes.
people are buying franchises like crazy. Franchises are actually fantastic. You have less competition in many instances from private equity who's kind of allergic to the royalties and the business limitations that are put on franchises. Buying a franchise is much like buying any other business, with the exception being, and shout out to Adam Walsh at the franchise firm, You have to review the FDD and the franchise agreement very closely because those
Yeah,
play significant role in what you can and can't do with the business after closing. You want to hire a franchise attorney. We've got some great ones that we work with who know that stuff, know the franchise landscape, and can tell you. But otherwise, you're just buying a small business.
absolutely.
Previously, the SBA required credit committees to review franchise agreements. So the SBA lender would actually have to look at and approve the franchise agreement. Now franchises are treated like any other business for eligibility purposes. Lenders do have to ensure that the franchisee has independent business control. So here's a fascinating, again, this is all going to come down to how this stuff is interpreted by various lawyers and various credit committees. Um, Last but not least, Kevin, is the collateral rules have been eased. Actually, sorry, fast tracking underwriting for loans under 500K.
Yeah.
Previously, there was fast tracking streamlined processing for sub 350K loans. Now, SBA credit score, if your SBA credit score is above the threshold, currently 155, the lender can skip full underwriting for a sub 500K deal. So that is a signaling of a desire to kind of expand some lending programs, which is kind of antithetical to, their broad sweeping SBA eliminates disastrous Biden era underwriting standards statement. But they did not notably, one thing many people had called for in our community was the increase of the
Yeah.
$5 million threshold. And that threshold is now still $5 million. So
Huge change, monumental.
monumental change. So that's basically it, Kevin. Any, quick off the cuff, high level impressions?
I mean, my first high level impression, and indulge me here for a quick second,
Here we go.
is
Here we go, everybody.
is a couple of months ago there was some chatter about how excited folks were that Doge was getting involved in SBA, and I kind of questioned, like, really? Are we sure? And I got a little bit dragged for, they would never do anything to change and roll anything back with the
Are
SBA
you
regs.
using this as like I told you so
So
moment? Is
I
that what
am
this is?
1000% issuing, and I told you so. Again, that said, I mean, totally nuanced because there are winners and losers on both sides of all these changes. So it's not totally I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but yeah, I think it signals certainly appetite to tighten the belt and become much more kind of rigorous and thoughtful under the current administration about how the SBA program is administered, despite its perceived profitability and success. I think a lot of these are really intended to kind of tighten up the risk profile of the SBA program overall, and kind of shifting requirements for guarantees and things like that, and making sure that they have access to recover on kind of the partial change of ownership guarantee rules, and things like that. All but sort of killing its effectiveness in our space. So anyway, yeah, I doubt that this is kind of the first of things. Obviously, this is a significant overhaul with a new iteration from SOP 7.1 to SOP 8. So now we'll see things iterated off of SOP 8 over the coming years as things with this administration continue to unfold. But if anything, I think this is a good signal that rather than raising limits and making access that much easier in many respects, we'll probably see continued kind of tightening of the belt and things like that. So will be interesting to watch. But that's my color and thoughts.
Well, so once I know you're eager to get off, Kevin, so you got to get back to some work,
No, no,
and
I'm
me
good.
too. But we've got 1,000 people on the line here. Let's indulge them for just a
All
second.
right.
1,000 people watching on X. I don't know how many on LinkedIn, probably four. But rule by rule, what did they do here, and was this a good thing or a dumb thing? Right? Did it make sense? Did it not make sense? Because oftentimes these rules are coming from regulators, Washington, wherever, and we on Main Street go, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. So
Yeah.
let's take them one by one and let's just rate it. I'll give you my take, you give me your take.
All right.
Partial buyouts effectively dead. Okay, we're back to if the seller rolls over equity, they have to PG the debt, personally guarantee the debt for 2 years. Um, it has to be done as a stock purchase. My rating on that is a dumb rule change. Okay. And the reason it's a dumb rule change is just eliminate the rule. Okay. Just eliminate the partial rollover because you've effectively eliminated. There's almost no circumstance that I can think of as a Main Street practitioner where you will do a partial
Correct.
rollover in a stock scenario where a seller will say, I'll stay on, and the minority investors will also personally guarantee the debt. It just isn't happening. So why make the change? So that one to me, that's a dumb rule change. What do you think?
Absolutely a dumb rule change. So dumb that I question, why the rule's still even there in there at all. But it's especially stupid. I mean, a lot of the frustration and excitement for when these rules got put in place is this is how deals have been done forever in the private equity world, and to roll that back. Effectively roll that back and kill it with these new updates. I mean, if a seller is rolling over 10% into the new entity, like why is this being treated differently than any other deal where you have, an owner that's sub 20% on the personal guarantee threshold? Like it doesn't make any sense, and it eliminates the single most common kind of acquisition structure with remained seller ownership. I'm scratching my head. Other than really the private equity lobby getting in the ear of the rule makers here, because this all but pushes private equity. It all but pushes small businesses that may have otherwise been targets of private equity, which are increasingly moving down market into the million and sub-$1 million EBITDA space. This all but pushes any deals like that where sellers want to continue on with a platform, back out to the private equity space where they have access to conventional financing, because it's dead in the SBA program now. I don't get it. It's dumb.
Yeah, and a couple years ago, Kevin, the rule was had to be 100% buyout
Hmm.
because we need the seller to walk away. That's what we want to have happen. I don't know why that is. I was never given like a policy justification of
Agreed.
why it's better to make the seller walk away completely. But at least it made sense to me, right? You had a requirement that there was no rollover, no nothing. Now we've got this weird middle ground that no one will ever be able to take advantage of. May have just gone as well have gone back to the prior rule, but also why did the prior rule exist? I don't know.
Yeah.
So moving on from that one, we both rated it as a dumb change. Number two, say goodbye to the 2 year standby note. I think this one's a good one, right? You have a minimum equity injection as a buyer of 10% into a small business. You can go avail yourself of investors if you need to support that. That is high leverage debt, guys. Like you're taking a high leverage debt on a illiquid, speculative in many instances, subscale business. Like there, like you said, Kevin, there is a conversation is that even a smart thing in the first place? And now we have risked increasing default rates even higher by trimming that back to 95%. Like I don't love it. But again, now we've got this weird middle ground where we've got the 10-year standby and just eliminate the whole damn rule. Just
Yeah.
eliminate the whole standby structure entirely. We've got this weird middle ground. So I'll say this one was a kind of a net good for everybody and good for the program, but again, poorly implemented.
Yeah, I generally say that's correct. This is a little bit nuanced. A lot of folks, and I tend to agree, will say that the straight leverage ratio isn't really the more important, right? That it's, the DSCR is important here, because what if you're buying a deal with significant cash flow? I mean, there are other things to look at here where this would otherwise make, a transaction that can very comfortably cash flow the deal be unattainable to buyers who don't have access to significant capital without giving up ownership. But to your point, if giving up some ownership to some investors to put some capital in is the compromise, it's hard to say that this is a really bad idea. I think it's nuanced. I could go either way on this one, candidly.
Okay. Next one, we'll just take them one at a time. High net worth buyers catching a break. Personal liquidity and high worth no longer disqualifying. Lenders may now evaluate global cash flow, spousal income, income from affiliates. Yeah, this makes a ton of sense to me, right? You've got a buyer who's buying a business that maybe isn't as good. You've got a bad business, amazing buyer, great balance sheet. His wife is, bringing in 500K per year, and you're telling me you can't look at the balance sheet, you can't look at his wife's income and say, hey, we're willing to take a little bit more risk on this business. But we are going to lend on terrible buyer. Many buyers that are buying in the ETA space, no income, balance sheets of
Yep.
virtually zero, and high quality businesses. I think that's even probably a more risky proposition than the contrast. So I like this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I I like it. I think it's overall a good change, certainly from a strictly commercial perspective. It's very smart, and just to drill in a little bit, it doesn't actually roll back. It doesn't. So for people that don't have a strong balance sheet, just to be clear, it doesn't make this harder for them to get loans. What it does is it makes it easier for people with strong balance sheets to get loans. And I think that's an important nuance. I would probably feel differently if the change in some way resulted in those without the strongest balance sheets, kind of personal overall balance sheets, if it made it more difficult for them to access capital, because putting aside the commercial sort of aspect of this that's undoubtedly smart, on behalf of the bank and SBA and its ability to recover, it would feel a little bit counter to the mission of the SBA and why we have this program available as opposed to conventional financing. So I give this a net positive or net win solely for that reason. If further changes come that actually make those without the robust balance sheets, make it even harder for them to access capital, I'd probably start to feel a little more nuanced on this one.
Well, and that's the next item. So you're a thumbs up on high net worth. I'm a thumbs up on high net worth. But the next one here is the exclusion of illegal. Well, not sorry, not illegal immigrants. The exclusion of visa holders and foreign nationals, no longer eligible.
Yep.
Um, Without getting into politics, Kevin, and going all crazy on me, it's a program funded by the American taxpayer. It should be for American taxpayers. Even if it's a subsidy neutral program, meaning it makes enough money to support itself without taxpayers, it's still a U.S. government program allowing, non-U.S. citizens to take advantage of it. Probably doesn't make a ton of sense. In fact, that's one that doesn't really pass the sniff test for most people. I just saw a comment on X where somebody said, and I quote, non-citizens were getting SBA loans, triple question mark. Um, I don't really have an official stance on this because I did not care when foreign nationals were investing small minority stakes in our transactions. Um, that never bothered me personally, but at least I think it makes sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I just to clarify that question, it wasn't necessarily foreign nationals just being able to come apply for and get an SBA loan. This
Mhm.
would have been, this would have been someone otherwise qualified for an SBA loan that maybe is taking investor capital or is business partners with someone.
Sub 49%. They had to be sub 49% of the business. Yeah.
Correct. That's right. And in that respect, I tend to agree with you, Eric. I mean, the point of the program, first of all, the point of the program was to help entrepreneurs, right? Now bringing in investor capital and giving like juicing some sweet returns to professional investors and things like that wasn't necessarily the intent of the program to begin with, but it's a great byproduct because the entrepreneurs who are running and guaranteeing these loans wouldn't otherwise have access to those businesses. And I do tend to agree with you. I think it's a fair criticism that, the types of returns that you can get on these highly levered deals that are only possible because they're subsidized by the American people, it feels a little off. I would have liked to see some more nuance. The ones that really get me are the cases where you have maybe someone, just because of how difficult our immigration system is, that doesn't fully qualify, but is, for example, married to a U.S. citizen or something like that. you have situations now where the spouse is the buyer, and it's a different entrepreneur. It's the husband that's actually running the deal. They just don't qualify for the loan. I would certainly like to see more nuance in the way that they rolled out this rule, but I think the kind of crux or general direction of the rule is well placed and well intentioned. That this program's intended to kind of benefit, um, you know, uh, American taxpayers and things like that. And so you get into arguments of, well, you could be an American taxpayer and not a green card holder. And so is there a more nuanced stance there? I tend to agree yes with that. I tend to empathize more with random investor in Taiwan wanting to deploy capital in small businesses in the US because they get much better IRR with SBA backed investments. And I do tend to agree with you that that's probably not the intent of the program.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So long way of saying thumbs down to that change. I'm going to group the next two together, which is the franchise agreement review elimination, CPA reviewed financials accepted. We'll call it streamlining kind of the underwriting process, making it smarter. I don't have any issue with those, right? If you're going to allow lenders and individuals to make decisions as it pertains to franchises, that's great. Those are high quality small businesses in many cases. Again, buyer beware and prudent lending standards still apply. So even though it's not required, lenders can still look and say, hey, we need to make sure that you're not entering into some stupid franchise thing. And then CPA reviewed financials. To me, I think that one's great. Looking at a rigid tax return and trying to make an intelligent decision about the viability of a small business is not ideal, particularly if you've got somebody. Um, it didn't go as far as referencing quality of earnings, but it would be nice if lenders would take that um, position that a quality of earnings that has done a proof of cash, has looked at the balance sheet,
Yeah,
looked at the financial statements, put it into accrual financing and thought, or accrual accounting and thought intelligently about it. I think that's a great change.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Okay.
I'll reserve
That was
some of the
easy.
words I spent on the last one.
That was easy. That was the easiest. That was great. So I think that's largely it, Kevin. So overall mixed bag. Is it doomsday? No. If you're buying a business and looking right now and you're not currently under LOI or about to go under LOI, you're going to need to incorporate these new ones. So be
Yes.
careful on notes, be careful on seller rollover. Otherwise, it's pretty much business as usual.
I agree. I agree. I think we're in a window right now where this is sky is falling of people trying to put deals together that we're counting on this. But outside of that, I think in the same way, the pendulum swung to business as usual pretty quickly when these SOPs rolled out in 2023. It's going to swing back pretty quickly
Well, and
by
Kevin,
summer.
I've been sounding the alarm bell for a long time on these rollovers, particularly when we saw stock deals go from 90-10 to 60-40 because of the rollover, and saying that that is not a good thing. Having all that stock-based risk is a significant risk, not only to those individuals, but also to the system. And people don't realize how significant that is. So that being gone, hopefully we'll set that back. And also partnering with the seller, right? I have long been skeptical that partnering with a seller is a good idea.
Almost
Um,
never see it go well.
it often does not go well. Yes. So I think a lot of these things in the long run will turn out to be good changes, but time will tell. We'll see how they're implemented.
Yeah. No,
Final
for
word,
sure.
Kev.
No, thanks for the offer of the final word, but I have nothing intelligent to add. I think you opened us well, you closed us well. So with that, I'll just say generally we'll continue to monitor any other updates or especially commentary as it comes and keep people posted. But drop us the line or comment on any of the platforms where this live stream is if you have follow-up questions, and we'll do our best to address them.